1969, almost everything that carried Neil Armstrong to the moon was designed, owned, and operated by the United States government. The rocket, the capsules, the lander, the spacesuits. NASA hired contractors, but NASA held the blueprints and called every shot. Now look at how America plans to go back. The lander that's supposed to set astronauts on the lunar surface is a version of SpaceX's Starship, owned by Elon Musk, or Blue Origin's Blue Moon, owned by Jeff Bezos. The rockets that launched those landers belong to those same two men. And in early 2026, when NASA reshuffled its entire return to the moon plan, the agency wasn't choosing between its own designs. It was waiting to see which billionaire's hardware would be ready first. So the question this video is really about isn't whether NASA still runs the show on paper, it's this. When the most powerful nation on Earth can't reach the moon without machines owned by a handful of private companies, who actually holds the keys? Let's be precise about what handing the moon to billionaires means, because it doesn't mean what the phrase might suggest. Nobody has sold the moon. No company owns a crater. Under the Outer Space Treaty, no nation or person can claim lunar territory at all. What's changed is something quieter and arguably most consequential. It's not ownership of the moon, it's ownership of the road to get there. Start with the change itself. Apollo was what engineers call a cost-plus program. NASA defined exactly what it wanted, paid contractors to build it, covered the overruns, and kept control of the design. Expensive and tightly controlled, but astonishingly fast. The Artemis program runs on a different logic. NASA now writes what are mostly firm fixed price contracts and buys a service rather than a machine. It tells a company, deliver this capability for this price, and the company keeps ownership of the spacecraft, the factory, and much of the know-how. NASA becomes a customer, sometimes one customer among several. You can see this clearly in the smaller robotic program called Commercial Lunar Payload Services. There, NASA explicitly contracts companies like Firefly and Intuitive Machines to deliver cargo, and those companies keep their landers and sell the leftover space to anyone else who wants it. NASA's own watchdog put it plainly. The agency has limited control over the lander design, systems, and infrastructure. It buys a ticket. It doesn't own the bus. Why would NASA give up that much control? Because the old way had become almost unaffordable. The Human Landing System program has cost about $6.9 billion so far, and NASA estimates it'll spend over $18 billion through 2030. Those numbers are enormous, but they're a fraction of what a fully government-owned lander would likely cost. By paying for a result instead of a process, NASA offloads financial risk, taps private investment, and gets competing companies racing each other to innovate. And here's the genuinely strong case for this model. Competition produces things a single government program rarely does. SpaceX's Starship is designed to be reusable on a scale Apollo engineers would have considered science fiction. The commercial approach also creates capability that outlives any one mission. A company building a lunar lander for NASA can sell that same service to other countries, other companies, universities. The government seeds an industry instead of funding a one-off stunt. When it works, taxpayers get more moon for less money, and humanity gets infrastructure that doesn't vanish the moment political priorities shift. Apollo, remember, was cancelled, and the capability simply evaporated. That's the promise. Now, the dependence. In February 2026, NASA restructured Artemis 3. The mission that was supposed to land humans on the moon got demoted to a test flight in Earth orbit, where an Orion capsule would dock with landers from SpaceX and Blue Origin. The actual landing slipped to Artemis 4 in 2028. Part of the reason was risk reduction, but there was another uncomfortable reality behind the decision. Both companies told NASA their landers wouldn't be ready in time. The world's leading space agency had to rebuild its flagship mission around the schedules of two private firms. Then it got more fragile. On May 28, 2026, during a ground test, a Blue Origin New Glenn rocket exploded on its launch pad at Cape Canaveral, destroying the vehicle and badly damaging the only pad the company has. New Glenn is the rocket meant to carry Blue Origin's lunar lander. With it grounded, some space policy analysts, including Eric Berger, noted that Blue Origin's inability to launch its lander soon likely puts it out of the running for Artemis 3. Which means that, at least for the moment, America's crewed return to the moon leans heavily on a single provider: SpaceX. Sit with that. One accident at one company narrowed one nation's path back to the moon, down to essentially one man's rocket. This is the line between two very different things. Paying a contractor to build you equipment is normal. Boeing built much of Apollo, but you own the result. Becoming dependent on infrastructure that someone else owns and operates is a different relationship entirely. If the provider falls behind, raises prices, reprioritizes, or simply has a bad year, your national space program inherits their problem. NASA can write requirements all day. It cannot make a privately owned rocket appear on a damaged launch pad. Now, in fairness, NASA is far from powerless here, and this is where the alarming version of the story needs correcting. The agency still sets every mission objective. It selects and trains the astronauts. It owns the SLS rocket and Orion capsule that actually carry the crew. It defines the safety requirements and it enforces them hard. NASA's inspectors have publicly flagged that Starship's lander is tall enough that it might tip on rough terrain, and that an elevator failure could strand the crew with no other way down. NASA tracks that as a top risk and can withhold approval until it's satisfied. A contractor that wants to keep getting paid has to meet the customer's terms. That's real leverage. So the dependence runs in both directions. The companies need NASA's money and its stamp of approval, and NASA needs their hardware. Neither fully controls the other. But look further out, and the balance starts to tilt. Suppose the moon becomes economically valuable. Water ice at the South Pole that can be turned into rocket fuel, a staging point for Mars. The companies that own the landers, the rockets, and eventually the fuel depots and habitats won't just be NASA's vendors. They could become the landlords of cislunar space. NASA contracts are temporary. The infrastructure and the expertise to run it increasingly lives inside private companies. Public money is paying to build capabilities that private owners will ultimately control. So, is NASA surrendering the moon, intelligently transforming itself, or both? The honest answer is both, leaning toward a transformation that NASA hasn't fully reckoned with. The agency still owns the mission, but it does not own the means anymore. For now, that's a workable trade because competition and private investment are buying speed and savings a government program couldn't match alone. The danger isn't the model, it's the math. A system built on competition stops protecting you the moment it collapses into a monopoly. And a single explosion in May 2026 showed how quickly two providers can become one. The deeper realization is that we're watching the early rules of an entire domain get written, and not in a treaty or vote, but in procurement contracts most people will never read. The question of who governs the moon is quietly being answered by who NASA decides to depend on. And the decision is being made now, while almost no one's looking. Here's what I'll leave you with. If returning to the moon requires private companies, should the public own a permanent stake in the infrastructure its money creates, or is renting access the smarter deal? I genuinely want to hear where you land.